Welcome everybody at this new session of the CEPR-VDEV webinar. Today we're very excited to have Jakob Svensson with us to present, who's joining us together with a number of his co-authors that will be helping to answer some of the questions. Jakob is joining us from IIES at Stockholm University. And the way we will operate this is for those that are regulars already know. Jakob will present during 1 hour. If you have questions during the hour, please use the Q&A to write your questions. Some of the co-authors that you see now here, there's Selene, there's Tessa, that have joined us, may answer some of those questions in writing. We will also be monitoring those questions, and if there are some that deserve a little bit more of discussion at a few points during the hour, we will interrupt and ask those questions directly. Then after the hour, we will open the mic for live questions for another 15 minutes. If you see questions that somebody else wrote that you are also very interested to hear the answer to, or to hear discussed, you can give the thumbs up so we know that those are questions of wider interest. If we do not get to your questions, don't be upset. It's sometimes hard to get to all the questions, and that's certainly not an evaluation of the question itself. So as you know, we're being recorded. The seminar will be posted on the YouTube channel afterwards. So as there's people that you think may want to see this afterwards, they can see it there. We obviously don't tolerate abuse during the seminar. And then maybe the last thing I should say is for those that are not regulars, so this is a seminar that takes place every webinar that takes place every 2 weeks. The next session will be in 2 weeks from now with Andrew Foster from Brown University. So with that, I believe probably most people have joined us, so I can turn the floor to Jakob. Very excited to hear about the work in Uganda.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me start to thanks for the invitation to present, and thank you everyone who is here online to listen and discuss. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully that works. So is it there?
Yes, this is perfect.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a project we've been working on for quite some time actually. And it's joint with Tessa at IIES, Selene and Ghisolfi at Lake Bocconi, and Francis and Nsonzi at Makerere University in Kampala. And I should say already now that if or when my presentation becomes too confusing, or if you have any difficult questions, you should of course try to ask those questions to the 3 co-authors that will be live chatting on the live screen there. So with that, let me begin, and let me start this presentation with a picture which I think illustrates an important fact about agricultural markets in low-income countries, and maybe especially so in sub-Saharan Africa. Namely, that markets tend to often be segmented. That is, in the same area and for the same crop, you would, on the one hand, observe typically large-scale farms producing and selling quality crops through regional or global value chains. And on the other hand, you would also observe at the same time typically small-scale farms selling a low-quality version of the same crops in informal markets. And importantly, these 2 market segments do not only differ in the quality of the product they are producing, but also in productivity and in income generating from farming. And given the dominant size of the small-scale sector or the smallholder sector, this market segmentation therefore helps to explain why average agricultural productivity has been low and slow growing in sub-Saharan Africa for decades, and why rural poverty remains high. The segmentation of markets also highlights an important research question, namely whether there is a link between quality and productivity and income. And at least recently, and in the policy sphere, it has almost taken for granted that such a link exists, and that it's a causal link. And that explains, for instance, why the World Bank, in its recent World Development Report, argues that quality upgrading and value chain participation are key to raise productivity and returns in many low-income countries. But despite that, or despite these types of claims, there is actually not that much robust evidence about this link between quality and productivity and income, and probably even less evidence about the implications of quality upgrading for small-scale or smallholder farms or households. So what we do in this paper then is a series of measurement and field experiments among smallholder maize farmers in Uganda to shed light on both the impediments to quality upgrading at the farm level and also to study its potential impact. And we proceed in 3 steps. So the first thing we do is try to document the quality at the farm gate, and also document or measure to what extent quality is observable by potential buyers. The second thing we do is try to estimate the return to quality at the farm gate, and thereby say something about whether there is a missing market problem here in this local context. And finally, we try to answer the question, can low returns explain why farmers produce and sell maize of low average quality? Or in other words, will farmers respond by producing higher quality if offered access to a market where quality maize is paid a market premium? And if so, what are the implications for farmers of such quality upgrading? We use different methods to answer these questions. So we're going to use laboratory tests and visual verifications to document the quality at the farm gate and to the extent it's observable. We're going to exploit experimental variation in the quality of the maize sold by farmers to estimate the return to quality at the farm gate. And we use a clustered randomized controlled trial designed in close collaboration with a Ugandan agri-trading company with the purpose of trying to emulate a situation where treated households gain access to an outward market for quality maize to answer the questions, will farmers upgrade and what are the implications of that? So just a very brief summary of the key findings. We established that the quality at the farm gate is low, and that it is partly observable. And this result is important at least for 2 reasons. So first, it establishes that the low quality problem begins at the farm gate and not further down in the production or value chain, where these initial problems most likely will be magnified, however. And second, the fact that it's partly observable rules out that the low quality we observe is the result of a classical Lammel's type of a problem. Second, we find that the returns to quality at the farm gate is essentially 0, which provides one explanation for why farmers are not investing in upgrading. And finally, we show that farmers do indeed respond when offered access to a market where quality is paid a market premium, and that upgrading is associated with both higher productivity and higher profit. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip to talk about related literature, but let me just quickly note that our work is related to a number of recent papers on the implications of market or buyer-driven quality upgrading in a developing country setting, and more generally to a relatively large literature on agricultural productivity and technology adoption, again, in a developing country setting. So this is what I plan to do now in the next 50 minutes. Hopefully I have time to do most of it. I'm going to talk very quickly through the context, that is the local markets for maize, then turn to discuss maize quality and verifiability of quality, relatively quickly go through our returns to quality experiment, and then spend the bulk of the time to talk about the market for quality experiment. And then if I have time, I'm going to use the intervention we rely on, namely a vertically integrated buyer of quality maize, as a case study to say something about the macro constraints, if I can put it that way, of commercially buying and processing and selling quality maize in Uganda. So that's the plan. Okay. So let's start with the context. So this study or the set of measurement and trials were conducted in Shibale, the district of Shibale in western Uganda. And here's a map. And rural Shibale is a relatively poor area with per capita income less than $1 per day. Maize is the dominant cash crop sold in local markets. And essentially, we can think of these local markets for maize as spot markets, implying that farmers and buyers agree relatively close before the sale about the amount the farmer is trying to sell and the price. Farmers pay directly, and the transaction typically takes place at the farm gate. There are two types of buyers in these village markets or local markets. They are local traders or local aggregators. What they do is typically buy from a smaller set of farmers and then resell to commercial traders. And then there are commercial buyers, commercial traders. And typically they pass through a village with a truck, and then they buy as much as they can over a relatively short period of time. So the local traders dominate these village markets. That said, about half of the farmers sold to a commercial trader at least once during the last 5 seasons. And the sale to a commercial trader is associated with a higher price. So we collected data on market prices from the trading centers closest to our trial villages in the larger market for quality experiment. And here I have I show these, illustrate these market prices, the average of the 5 trading centers over the at least part of the trial period. And let me highlight 3 results here. So first of all, as you can see, there are large variation in prices both within and across, especially across season. Prices tend to increase slowly between harvest season, but there's much more substantial, much more idiosyncratic variation in market prices within harvest seasons. Okay, I hope that gives you a brief introduction to how these local markets function. So let me then turn now to the main questions we try to answer in this paper, and start with the issue of maize quality and verifiability of quality. That is, what is maize quality? Why should it matter? And to what extent is it observable? So the quality of maize, or the economic potential economic value of maize, is fundamentally about the nutritional value of the grain, whether the maize is safe for consumption. And in principle, you can go to a lab and test for this, but that requires, of course, lab equipment, and it's costly, and it's seldom done, or in principle, never done at the farm gate. So at the farm gate, one estimates or quantifies quality through visual inspections of bags of grain that the farmers stand to sell. And a bag of maize is then considered of high quality if it contains no non-grain substances such as stones or insects. It contains no defected kernels, so the kernels are not damaged or rotten or moldy or discolored and so forth. And if the kernels are sufficiently large, of right color and dry. And the presence of these defects are a direct measure of quality, or rather lack of quality, because they are essentially waste that you need to process away before you can take away before you can process the grain, for instance, for instance by milling it. But they also indirect proxies measures of poor quality, as these defects are associated with the risk of the product becoming unsafe for human consumption. So, for instance, non-grain substances like stones and dirt indicates that the maize has been stored directly underground, which raises the risk of contamination. And such contamination can quickly then spread in the bag. Defective grains, on the other hand, are direct indicators of various infestation in the grain. And while in principle, you can sort these defective grains away at a later point in the value chain, there's still an increased risk that the remaining grain that might look perfectly fine is already contaminated or will soon be because of this being mixed with defective grains over a longer period. And finally, growth of bacteria and mold and etc. Is an increasing function of high moisture. So keeping the moisture low is an important quality dimension. So overall, to minimize the risk that the final product is unsuitable for human consumption, that requires the prevention of these types of defects already at the farm level. So what can the farmers then do? Well, the farmers can control quality both by various pre-harvest activities, that is how they prepare the land, plant, weed, and so forth, but maybe in particular through various post-harvest activities. So how they harvest and decob the maize, whether they dry the maize or how they dry the maize, and whether they clean, sort, and how they store the maize. So let me then tell you how we try to measure the maize quality. And in the end, we perform 4 different types of tests of quality and verifiability of a quality. And let me quickly go through them before presenting some results. So the first test we did, what we did was to sample a set of farmers, 50 farmers to be specific. And we had enumerators visiting each of these farmers at the time of sale, and the enumerators then visually inspected all the bags that the farmer wanted to sell for the presence of 10 types of defects. So the defects I mentioned before, such as stones, insects, whether the kernels are rotten or moldy and so forth. So they inspected the bags and recorded whether these types of defects were present in the bags they inspected. And the mean of those 10 defects we were looking for in a bag is what we call the visually verifiable defects. So that's our first measure of quality. The second measure of quality uses the same 50 farmers plus an additional 30 farmers surveyed in over 2 seasons. And what we did here is that we bought a random bag from the farmer, and we took that bag to Kampala and tested it. And in particular, we weighed all types of defects in the lab, and the percent of waste in the bag as measured in the lab is what we call the lab verified defects. Then we did a moisture test measured by mobile moisture meter in the field. And finally, for a subset of the bags we bought, we also tested for aflatoxin. Okay, so those are the 4 measures. Now I'm going to show you some results for at least some of these measures. Starting with visually verified defects. Remember, these are the number of defects in the bag you could verify by opening and checking. And lab verified defects, which is something you have to take into the lab and check how many defects are there in this, how much do they weigh as a share of the sample you are testing. And as can be seen, for visually verifiable defects, we find a mean of 2.5. So the average bag then has 2.5 number of defects. The median is 2. For lab verifiable defects, the distribution is more skewed. So we find a mean of 0.26, which means the average bag contains 26% waste that should be sorted away before processing it, while the median is 0.14 or 14%. And next 2 graphs looks at the relationship between these different these different quality measures. So the left-hand side graph speaks to the verifiability of maize. So it looks at the relationship between visually verified defects on the x-axis and lab verified defects on the y-axis. And as can be seen, when the bag contains relatively few verified defects, the relationship between verified defects and lab verified defects is relatively flat. But the percentage of waste increases rather rapidly if the bag contains more than say a couple of defects. The right-hand side graph plots the predicted probability of aflatoxin levels exceeding the limit imposed by the Uganda Bureau of Standards. And as you can see, the relationship here is roughly log linear. So as the share of sample lost to waste doubles, so does the predicted probability that aflatoxin levels are too high. So to summarize this measurement exercise, farmers tend to sell maize of low and possibly unsafe quality, and quality is at least partly observable.
Jakob, let me ask a few questions here because
absolutely,
there have been a few questions in the Q&A that relate to this. So there was a question on the share of the maize production that is used for self-consumption, and I think that related to an earlier question on whether these are smallholders or larger farmers. And the related question obviously is if there are certain quality aspects that matter or that farmers may care more about for self-consumption than for the market. How do you factor that in? Questions, I'll give them all, is that to what extent is the quality questions related to past pesticide use, etc., that either you factor in or that farmers may factor in?
Yeah, so let me start with the question about why quality should matter. So while if you look at the world production of maize and what it's used for, a relatively small share is used for human consumption. It's primarily used for animal feed. That in this part of Africa, it's also used to feed animals, but then it's usually the rest products after processing that you use for feeding animals. So most of that maize we are testing for here, or that is produced in these local markets, goes to is for human consumption. And some of the, while maize consumption in Uganda is not super large, in neighboring countries like Kenya, for instance, but also in South Sudan and parts of Congo, maize is the staple food for people. So overall, we are talking here about a output that goes to private consumption. When it comes to pesticide and stuff like that, I really don't have very much to say. I think that the core thing to think about, and it's important for what we do later on, that there are stuff you can do pre-harvest, like using pesticide, for instance, that has an impact both on how much your output will be, and given at least the type of test we are doing, the quality of the product. Of course, you can use the wrong pesticides and too much of pesticide, and that creates a product that might not be so particularly healthy. But that's nothing we test for here. I hope I quickly answered the questions you raised. Otherwise, let me know.
Yeah, and then there's two other points, I think, also related to each other. So there's a clarification question on how long does it take to carry out these visual checks for the 10 defects. And then I guess there was a related question earlier on whether these are the type of checks you do are the type of checks the traders usually would do, or what do you know about what the checks?
Okay, good. So these tests goes pretty quickly. What you do is you open the bag, you take your testing shovel to pick up what's not on the just at the top of the bag, what's more in the middle, and you check. So that goes relatively quickly. I think my sense is that most traders do some of this testing, but maybe not so carefully as we did. And of course, you don't want to buy a bag of maize that just have stones in it. So some testing you surely do. But the key thing here, what we talk about here, is not whether they do this testing or not, and how much testing they do, but rather that it's possible to do, and it's relatively cheap and goes quickly to check the quality of the maize. Good. So let me continue then to, so where were I? Here I was. Quality at least partly observable, and maize is of low and possibly of safe quality. So why then, if the economic value of maize depends on its quality, why is the quality of maize sold by farmers so low? Well, so one starting point to answer that question is to start with the neoclassical household model. So with complete markets, the production decision is separate from the consumption decision. So a utility maximizing farmer would then choose inputs to maximize profit. And here we have a profit function where you have a price that depends on the quality of the crop. So P of Q, F is output. There are two inputs, one that primarily affects output, so X, and one that primarily affects inputs, so that's Z. And there are some input prices here, CX and CZ. So the first order conditions for this problem gives us the standard marginal conditions, telling us that farmers will use any particular input until its marginal value product is equal to its marginal cost. In other words, in the neoclassical agricultural household model, prices and the elasticity of price with respect to quality are the key drivers of the decision to produce high quality maize. So given that, does the local market actually reward quality? To answer this question then, we designed an experiment aimed at quantifying the returns to quality. And that may just start with a reminder. So low quality farm gate is determined by a number of factors. And some of these factors the farmer can directly influence through good agricultural practices. And in particular, by harvesting and shelling the cob without breaking or cracking the grains, by not drying or storing cobs on the bare ground, and by drying, cleaning, and sorting the grain correctly, quality can improve. So we exploited these insights by developing a service package, which included assistance with several of these key harvest and post-harvest practices. And this service package was then implemented by agricultural workers with access to portable agricultural machinery, and it was managed by the staff from the research team. And very quickly, we enrolled 100 farmers, equally split between the treatment and control group. Before harvest, in the treatment group, the households were visited and offered this free service package. They were also asked to contact the research team before selling it, and we offered them to pay. We offered them about $3 if they did contact the research team before selling. In the control group, they were also visited before harvest, and they were offered a bit more money than to contact the research team before selling. And when the farmers were ready to sell, in both groups, we visually inspected the quality, measured the weight of all bags, tested for moisture, and bought one bag that was further tested in the lab. And then finally, after selling the maize, they were visited again, and this time to collect information on sales volume and prices. So let me quickly go through the results. So this is essentially the first stage, showing the number of visually detected defects in bags in the treatment and the control group. And you see there's a huge difference. In other words, the service package we developed function as it should. So in the control group, basically there are no defects in these bags visually observed, while in the treatment group, that is, while in the control group, we see that visually detected defects are common, with the main bag containing 2.5 defects. These large differences are also present when you instead look at lab verified quality. In the treatment group, the mean is 6.5, meaning that 6.5% of the average bag contains waste, while in the treatment group, the corresponding number is 32.2%. Again, the distribution for lab verified defects are rather skewed. So given these large differences in observed and lab verified quality, what happened to prices? Well, as you can see, these are two CDF, CDF for prices in the treatment and the control group, and these CDFs overlap. So in other words, there's no evidence that the buyers paid a higher price to farmers who had received the service package. And the regression analysis here in the table to the right just confirms these non-parametric results. So to sum up, average quality is low. Farmers face weak incentive to invest in high quality. For that reason, we will probably expect them to invest little in quality enhancing processes, and the market will be dominated by low quality maize, which is also what we observe. So these results raises a number of important follow-up questions. In particular, can farmers produce high quality if quality is valued on the market? And what are the implications for farmer profit and productivity of such quality upgrading? And to answer these two questions, then we implement this field experiment, generating exogenous variation in access to a market for quality maize. And just to conceptualize what we do, we can go back to the neoclassical household model. So what the intervention did was essentially to offer farmers in the treatment group an inverse demands schedule. That is a price, P T, above the prevailing market price P, conditional on the maize meeting quality threshold Q bar. The intervention also had a second component, namely an extension service component, to improve households' ability to produce a higher quality maize. So what I'm going to do next is to very quickly describe both of these interventions in some detail, and then turn to say a few words about the trial design, and then present the main findings. So
maybe before you do that, there has been kind of many questions about the market structure. So on the trader side, I know you'll say a little bit about this later, but can you maybe give some basics on the importance of reputation and repeated contracts?
Yeah. So Yeah, a couple of points. So I think that the one thing I want to, which is not a direct answer to what you're asking, is so when you think of an individual farmers thinking about upgrading, the important question, of course, is whether that farmer, when he or she upgrades quality, will receive a higher price for the product that she is selling. That's essentially what the experiment we are doing tries to answer. Of course, things might look different if farmers came together and jointly decided to upgrade quality. Maybe the outcome would be different then. And then when it comes to the market structure, so it's true that that farmers tend to sell to the same local buyer most of the time. Very few over these 7 seasons. If you look at the control group data, which we have for many seasons, very few sold to different traders each and every time. That said, very few actually always sold to the same trader. So there's some movement, but there's clearly some reputation going on in these local markets. There are traders you know, and you maybe feel more comfortable to sell to. So that's clearly the case. There are no written contracts here, and as I said before, this is essentially a spot market. So even when you sell to a guy you have been selling to for many times, what happens is that you try to contact that trader, or the trader contact you. You agree on a day, and then when you meet, you agree on a price, and the trader weighs the bag, and somehow you as a farmer agree that that's the correct weight, or you may know the weight yourself.
Okay, and there's a somewhat related question from Abhijit, who's asking, would you not worry that the traders are reacting to expected quality when they decide to pay attention to the quality in the bank?
Yeah, again, to answer that question, you would need to repeat this experiment several times, which we didn't do. I think there are two things here. So first of all, quality is partly observable. So clearly here, if the trader wanted to check for quality, he or she could check for quality. And again, going back to how I started this off, if you are a farmer and you want to think about upgrading your quality, of course, it's important to know what happens the first time you do it. Maybe you realize I have to do this 3, 4, 5 times before someone picks up that I'm selling high quality, and that we cannot rule out. And my interpretation of the market is that these local traders are aware of the quality, and the reason that they buy it and don't pay a higher price is that when they resell it, they mix it all together in the bags, and then it doesn't really matter if there's some variation in quality there. The price that local trader receive is largely unaffected. So you have a market here which is in some ways specialized in producing low quality maize. Okay, so let me continue that. So that the market for quality experiment was designed to emulate a market for high quality maize. And to achieve that objective, we collaborated then with an agri trading company. And what the company did was to commit to buy quality maize at a premium throughout the whole maize buying season. To that end, the company had agents active in the treatment villages over basically a 2-month period for each season. And what these agents did was to use visual inspections of bags and a mobile moisture meter to verify quality. And they only bought bags with quality maize. So bags that had waste or defected kernels in it, or maize with a too high moisture level, were rejected. The research team then randomly selected which villages the company should be active in, and randomly selected a household in the villages who should be primarily invited to participate. The research team also determined the premium for quality with the aim of reproducing a market equilibrium. So in short, intervention tried to create experimental variation in access to a market or a buyer of quality maize. So clearly a key design issue for us here is to determine the market premium. I just showed you that it doesn't seem to be such a market in this local context. So we cannot go out and just measure how that what the premium is in empirically. So instead, what we do to arrive at an answer was to use a simple theory that would predict the premium as a function of a key metric we can observe, namely the extent of defects. So we're going to think of a very simple framework where farmers can sell either low or high quality maize. Low quality can be processed further by the buyer into high quality. Only high quality maize can be processed to flour. And we're going to assume, which of course is not correct, but simplifies the problem, that waste and defects only affects the net waste of the maize. So we do not consider this elevated risk when there are defects in the maize. And we assume that the buyer's marginal cost of sorting and cleaning low quality into high quality maize is zero. And then we're going to assume that there's perfect competition in these markets. So in equilibrium, the farmer is going to be indifferent between upgrading or not, which means that the model here, or the framework here, gives us an estimate gives us basically the minimum premium in the market. So here, essentially, the IR constraint is the binding for these farmers. And then in equilibrium, the difference in economic value of high and low quality maize will just be the difference in the amount of waste in the maize valued at premium quality prices. So that we can, in principle, go and measure. So based on pilot data, we estimated our farmers would be able to reduce waste by maybe 5 to 15 percentage points. We settled on the lower end of that range, and then picked a premium that was 5% above the market price at the trading centers. I think it's fair to say that this is a lower bound of a market-based quality premium for several reasons. So in the model, as I said, the IR constraint is binding here. Second, and more importantly, we did not factor in the lower contamination risk of buying quality maize. And thirdly, exposed, we found out that the differences in waste between average quality and the quality bought by the company was not 5%, but rather 18 percentage points. On the other hand, you could argue that most farmers here sell to local traders, and the premium was based on the average price in the nearby trading centers. So the perceived premium, if I can call it that way, that is the difference between the price the local trader paid and the price that the company paid, was roughly 13%. As I talk about in a few minutes, it was actually in the end lower than that. Okay, I'm going to hurry up a little bit. I have 15 minutes left. The extension survey component that was part of the intervention that was intended to ensure that farmers had up-to-date knowledge considered necessary for producing maize of sufficient quality. It was organized around a demonstration plot in each treatment villages. All treatment households were invited. It was run for 2 seasons, 5 meetings per season, where the extension service agent had provided hands-on training on best practice. Very quickly on the trial design, it was motivated by several features, both of the local context and intervention. So the intervention was this integrated value chain was complex and costly, and that reduced or constrained what we could do in terms of a number of clusters. We were concerned with spillover and market effects. That is, that people who did not upgrade it might be affected by this intervention. one of the more important things we talked about was that it may take time before farmers decide to upgrade it. So we wanted to study this issue for a longer period of time. And then, you know, we can be concerned with, and there are large aggregate variation over seasons. Impact might be a function of these states. And again, one way to overcome that to some extent is to have more rounds of data. And finally, of course, we wanted to have power to pick up reasonable treatment effects. So in the end, we choose to allow for this quality upgrading and smooth out aggregate shocks, which we choose a clustered repeated measurement design. So we restricted the number of clusters to 20 and expanded the number of waves. So we're following these clusters over in total 7 seasons. And this is a picture of the trial design. I'm not going to go through this, but just highlight a couple of things. So the baseline was run for 3 seasons. We follow them for 3 seasons. We have a baseline panel of roughly 550 household season observations. Follow-up was run for 4 seasons, and we have a follow-up panel of roughly 680 household season, and together that gives us a complete baseline follow-up panel of roughly 1,200 household seasons observations. Very quickly on the power, it's a function of stuff you're very well aware of. The key thing is that these things, the variance, intercluster correlation, autocorrelation, varies across the different outcomes we are going to be looking at, which means that the power to detect effects also varies across different outcomes. So for some outcomes like yield and price, the experiment can pick up relatively small effects or small effects. For others like profit, it can pick up medium effects. And for some outcomes like expenses and acreage, it can pick up only relatively large effects. And that's important to keep in mind when we look at some of the results. Main specifications are COVA. Key parameter estimate is the average, is gamma, the average treatment effect over the 4 follow-up rounds. Not much issue with attrition. It was small and similar across assignment groups. Looking at the baseline balance, 2 things are worth highlighting: that there are large differences in outcomes across seasons at baselines, which highlights the importance of this repeated design. When we pull the data to increase precision, we find no evidence of differences in baseline means. There's no indication that the 2 groups are diverging over time, and a joint test of balance reveals that the baseline outcomes are not predictive of assignment to treatment. So 10 minutes left. Let me take that quickly to go through the main findings. I start by looking at the main outcome of interest, namely profit. So this graph then shows the CDF of profits in the treatment and control group. And as evident, the CDF for profit is shifted to the right for farmers who gain market access. And this profit increase is driven by several mechanisms. First, prices decreased as farmers upgraded the quality of their maize. So if you produce higher quality, you receive the higher price in the treatment group. Second, local traders actually responded to the intervention by paying a higher price also for average quality. Third, agricultural productivity increased, and all these 3 effects together then resulted in a relatively large increase in revenues. Cost also increased, more cultivation expenses, higher in investments, but the revenue effects dominate, implying that profit increased, implying a mean increase in profit of 40 to 80%, depending on how you actually value family labor. So let me then discuss in somewhat more detail then how this increase in farmer income was generated. And this is what I'm going to do. Let's go through that. So again, just to remind you here, the intervention had involved an agri-trading company offering to buy maize of sufficient quality from pre-selected households in treatment villages. They stood ready to buy throughout the harvest season. All bags bought by the company were inspected by the company's field staff. They paid a premium for quality maize. So averaging across the 4 follow-up seasons, we find that roughly 40% of the farmers sold at least some bags of maize of sufficient quality to the company. But you also see this steep time trend. In the first follow-up season, less than 1 in 5 of the farmers sold quality maize to the company, while in the last follow-up season, roughly 60% of the farmers did so. In panel B, which is data from the company, we look at their buying pattern, and this is data for the last 2 seasons. And as you can see, about 40% of the farmers choose not to sell to the company. That is, they were not interested in selling high quality maize to the company. About 1/3 of the farmers managed to produce sufficiently high quality so the company could buy all they wanted to sell right away. About 15% of the farmers tried to sell but were initially refused because the quality was not sufficiently high. So they were asked to either dry the maize further or sort the maize or clean the maize further. And they did so, and then the company bought at least some of their maize in the second round. And then about 10 to 11% of the farmers, they also tried to sell, but their quality was too low, so the company refused to buy. Lab verified quality. In the last season, the company actually took samples of all bags they bought and took it to the lab. They found, as I mentioned before, that the average share of defects was 8.1%, and that should be compared then, of course, this is not a causal estimate, but still interesting, that the average share of defect in maize sold in nearby villages, as I talked about before, was 26%. So it's an 18 percentage points difference. What about prices? Well, quality upgrading was rewarded with significantly higher price in treatment villages. Again, you see the CDF in the treatment group shifted to the right. On average, treatment farmers earned about $2.40 per bag more in the treatment relative to the control group, which corresponds to about an 11 percentage point increase in prices. And as farmers obtain higher prices for higher quality output, neoclassical profit maximization predicts that farmers will increase the intensity of input use across all inputs to increase the amount of high quality output to be produced. And these predictions are largely borne out in the data. For instance, we find that the expenditure on all types of input, in particular seeds and fertilizers, increased by about 33%, although one should then note that increase start from a very low value starting point in the control group. 1 in 10 of the control farmers use any seeds, and very few use any fertilizers. We observe large changes in post-harvest investments, which is crucial for maize quality. So in the control villages, most of them, maybe 2/3, dried their maize in direct contact with soil, few sort and few winnow their maize. In the treatment group, these effects are essentially doubled. Looking at investment and productivity then, again, when we look at yield, there is this shift in the CDF. Yield increased by about 112 kilo per acre, or by 15 percentage points relative to the control group. What we can do then actually, and we also observe then that these positive effects on price and yield resulting in a significant increase in revenue. So you can ask the question, well, is that driven only by the price, or how much is it driven by the increasing output? So we do a simple decomposition here, showing that of this increase, the 30% increase in revenues, about 50% works through the quantity effect, and 45% works through the upgrading or price effect. Okay, I'm almost done with the main findings. So let me turn then to the last one, namely income. So the ultimate aim here of linking farmers to a buyer of high quality was to increase farmer income and reduce rural poverty. So to calculate farmer income, we need to take into account how we should value farmers' own and family labor. And in this context, there is an active market for hired labor. And here is data from the control group showing that the average control household use both family labor and hired labor. The problem for us is, of course, that hired labor, the cost of that, or the price of that, we absorb directly, but we don't do that for family labor. So to make some progress, let's first just look at the treatments of effects on labor, because they're kind of interesting. So total labor increased by around 20% in the access to market group compared to the control group. But as you can see, there's this change in the type of labor the farmers are using. So in the treatment group, they actually reduced the amount of family labor by about 16%, but they increased the amount of hired labor by about 36%. And clearly, when you think about profit and how these effects changes profit, it depends how we measure that, or how the effect on profit depends then on both relative productivity and relative cost of these type of labors. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit. In the end, we take a rather agnostic approach here and just specify a profit function that allows for any value of family labor from 0 up to the point where family labor is valued as high as hired labor. And the figure down here illustrates the results. The table shows the two polar cases. And I think the key thing to take away from these is that these estimates of profits are large. So in the case when alpha is equal to 0, that is when we don't value family labor, we find a $63 increase in an average of $63 increase in the treatment relative to control group, when in the other polar case where we value family labor similar to hired labor, the profit effect is almost $100. And these are large increase if you remember the context of our study, where actually most people live on less than $1 a day. So what do I have? A few minutes?
Yeah, we're hitting six, but I know you have another couple of points, so maybe you can focus on the main points to finish. Some of the questions are related, I think, some to the points.
Yeah, okay. So let me say a couple of points very quickly. So one is that, so we find that farmers increase their yield and harvest, but also use more labor and more input. It's also possible that quality upgrading could affect how well a given bundle of inputs are used. So without going into the detail here, what we could do then is we can add some more structure. We can assume that the farmers have access to some Cobb-Douglas production function, and then basically estimate or back out the TFP using the control firms, and then estimate how TFP residual then varies between the two groups. And what we find is that there is a large positive effect if you believe in these types of TFP estimates, effect size of roughly 1/2 of the standardization in the control group. The other thing we did was to look at market and spillover effects. And that's interesting because we know that not all farmers upgraded, and we can then exploit that fact by look at possible spillovers. So this two graphs shows on the left-hand side just how the market shares changed in response to the intervention. And that's maybe not so interesting here, but let's just focus on instead on the right-hand side, which is the effect on how local traders and commercial traders set their what prices they offered. And as you can see, we can't say much about the commercial traders. The precision there is not. It's a very imprecise estimate. But for local traders, we have a relatively precise estimate that suggests that the prices they were paying increased by essentially 5 percentage points, well, by 5% relative to the control. And these are two important implications. So first of all, this spillover effect led to higher average prices in the treatment group, and the back of the envelope calculation shows that approximately 30% of the increase in average prices in treatment relative to control is driven by this market spillover effect. The second implication is that since the premium for quality was set relative to trading center prices, the fact that local prices or village prices increased implied that the relative price of higher quality maize in local markets fell. So I talked about 30% before. De facto, in the end, it turned out that price difference was closer to 8%. So in other words, this spillover market effect mitigated the incentives for quality upgrading. Very last point I'll say, then I'll leave the rest for possible discussions. So in a parallel trial, we looked at the direct effects of the extension survey program, and very quickly we find no impact on harvest value, price, profit, and yield. Of course, that does not rule out that the extension survey program had no impact in this combined intervention, but we do think that it tells us that it's unlikely that this kind of a supply intervention by itself would significantly and sustainably change how farmers operate. So let me end there. If you don't have any more specific question, I'm happy to go through this case study.
Yeah, I've been postponing the questions, so before you go to the discussion. So
yes, absolutely.
So there's a few people that we've asked to kind of hold off. So if you can raise your hand so you can ask your question orally, or also anybody else, obviously, who has a question. So if you raise your hand, we know to give the floor to afterwards. So I'll first let you conclude, of course.
Me? Well, so, well, the conclusion. Okay, so I conclude very quickly. So we also ran this. So in the end, I want to talk about this case study that actually starts to focus on the intervention itself and so forth. And a couple of points that I want to end with. So factoring out all the evaluation costs, the agri-trading company essentially broke even in 2 out of the 4 seasons, 2 out of 4 follow-ups seasons. So in some sense, and I would discuss the various reasons why that was the case. And in some cases, we can say that, you know, on the one hand, we find these very large effects, and they are probably there because we focus on a segment, namely very poor household, which do not have any access to these types of markets. So they are excluded from any global value chains. And if you manage to you know, target your intervention to them, the impacts are very large. But the case study also shows that it's unlikely probably that this type of intervention will be run by a lot of for-profit maximizing firms, simply because for various reasons it's not simply profitable enough, and it is at least not as profitable as it could be if you, instead of choosing to buy from smallholders, for instance, select to buy from larger firms. Of course, then alternative lens through which these results could be assessed, and that's through a cost effectiveness in a program evaluation lens. That is, if this is not a financially viable model, one could consider using subsidy money to generate such a market. And while we cannot make proper cost-benefit comparison with other programs that have been evaluated to help the very poor, at least we think that the effects we document suggest that this is a type of program that, or type of candidates to an intervention worth investigating more closely. So thank you for that. And over to you, Karen.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a few hands that are raised. So maybe you can first go to Menno Pradhan, who had a question for this, flagged a question for discussion earlier. Yeah, Menno, if you, excellent, you should be able to.
I can talk. So I had thank you for the seminar, it was very interesting. On one of your concluding slides, you had, you said you thought it was not due to the extension service that was provided, and you referenced to an other article. But I'm a bit confused here, because in the beginning of the seminar, you showed that an extension service actually raised the quality a lot. So I've thought actually extension services in this case had a big effect on quality, only that quality wasn't rewarded, and you added to this a reward to quality. So I'm a bit confused how you can conclude why it was not driven by the extension services, but was driven by the market intervention that you made.
Sorry, I went too fast. So the extension survey program we use to generate exogenous variation in quality, that's not the extension survey part of the market for quality evaluation, because that was a program we developed. It was rather costly having these hired people with machinery to go around to different houses. So that would not be something I would recommend these farmers to do. They would make huge losses from it. So the extension service program we offered to farmers in the markets for market access intervention was a more standard hands-on program where you have an extensive service agent visiting the village, showing household what the best practice is when it comes to both pre-harvest and post-harvest practices. And that second intervention was the one that we looked at as in a separate trial. So what happens if you have these village extension service agents come and visit the villages 5 times a season, help them and explain what is the best thing you can do when it comes to weeding or planting or harvesting and various post-harvest activities. And there we show that if you do that, essentially nothing happens. So taking that result into account, we conclude that the findings we find in this combined intervention, well, at least they're not purely driven by the extension survey component. And then we can also say, of course, we can relate to, we are not the first one, of course, to evaluate extension service program. And I think my reading of the literature is that when it comes to extension service, about crops that farmers have been growing for quite some time, like maize, these traditional programs, even if they're hands-on, typically have very small effects, and that's consistent with what we find.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. I think Jean-Marc also had a question, so maybe Mark, you want to come in?
I guess so. I have one question and one other that is related to one of Abhijit's points. So these results seem to be also consistent with some market power from the traders, right? When they're negotiating the farm gate, and here's where Abhijit's point comes on, right? So why is it that these traders weren't able to provide incentives to so if the firm is at the end of the day making money out of the higher quality, why is it that the traders weren't able to provide incentives to farmers?
So first of all, I think that the result that due to increased competition in these local markets, the local traders raised prices, suggests that they do have some market power. again, exactly how that markets function, because there are quite a few traders on these local traders on these markets. Most of them just buy from a handful of farmers, but at least we observed that they were willing to offer more money to the farmers when they face competition, which suggests that they were making positive runs from these trades. So the question of incentives, yes, again, it's for sure, to me, it suggests that these local traders could, if they wanted to, and still make some money on the margin, raise prices and demand higher quality. Again, why are they not doing that? Well, we can't really answer that question with the data we have, but my sense from talking to people and so forth is that for these local traders, it doesn't really matter very much. If they sell and buy more high quality maize, they in turn are not going to get a higher price for what they are producing. So it is in some ways that for various reasons, which may have to do with, it's not that there's no informational problems here. It's not perfect information, but it's also not quality is not totally not observable. But so maybe because of informational constraints, maybe because of a whole lot of problems later on in the value chain, we are in equilibrium where this local level is simply doesn't pay off for anyone to pay for quality. In order to study that, of course, you will need to do a different intervention than we did. So we looked at a vertically integrated company. So in that sense, we jump over all these middlemen and traders and so forth. And the cost of that is that we cannot really say much about, why these different actors in the low quality chains are doing what they are doing. On the other hand, and this was to ensure that we could actually create this exogenous differences in a demand schedule that we offer to farmers. Somewhat answered your question.
So I don't know whether there was a bunch of questions of Abhijit that your co-authors have been answering. Abhijit, if you want to come in, let us know if you want to do any follow-up on those. If not, I think Ileana, you also had a question from the way back on heterogeneity.
Yes, I was just wondering, when you looked at the effect of the returns to quality, if you had explored how that varies with the type of trader that you sell to, and also if you saw a switch, meaning after the service, whether people switch to selling to different on their own, if they switch to selling to different types of traders.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer is simple. They all sold to local traders in both groups. So there was no change that we could see. There might have been. Now I don't remember if there were different. If the exact traders were the same. Well, I'm actually not sure we have that data either. But they were all reported to be local traders, and not these commercial traders coming from somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. There was another hand up, but it disappeared. So I guess that must mean you answered. No, there it is again. Sorry. Hope Mickelson has a question. So Hope, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah. So I had a question about sort of the households that are storing for consumption and also for sale. So there's some evidence that Vivian Hoffman has from a JDE paper a couple of years ago that shows that farmers put a premium on their own maize, in part out of suspicion related to the quality of maize available in markets. So I'm wondering, and the fact that you see some labor increases suggests this isn't exclusively driving the result, whether you think there might be something happening whereby once there's an incentive in the market to produce quality, households are just reallocating higher quality maize that they kept for their own consumption into the market. Is there a possibility that that's happening, and how would that affect your interpretation of the results?
So what we observe, but this is, now I'm talking about small effects and huge standard errors around them, is that farmers in the treatment group actually on the margin sold slightly less and consumed slightly more of their own maize, which is consistent, of course, with the paper you mentioned, that if you manage to produce better quality, you also on the margin going to consume a bit more of that quality. This is speculative because these effects are not significant. But at least it doesn't. The results we have doesn't suggest that farmers in the treatment groups started to sell a higher share of their output. If anything, they consumed a bit more of their own output.
Okay, thank you so much, Jakob. And I think with that, we've passed our time a little bit, but that's because it was such an interesting discussion. So let me just remind everybody before logging off that Jakob will be available to answer further follow-up questions in the Zoom room as of 6:30, and you've seen the link to the Zoom room in the chat. And so with that, let me just give a big thanks to both Jakob and his co-authors who've been answering all the questions for participating, and hope to see many of you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much.